Well, it's a great privilege for me to be here in Slovenia and to have been able to listen to so many of the presentations. I have to admit, in the available time, I'm not truly going to be able to talk about the entire world. I think every country has systems that are as rich and complex as we've just heard about Portugal. And I think one of the things that the book that Professor Miroshnikova and Professor Davis have just edited is that it gives us an excellent oversight into many of these systems. I had the privilege of writing an introduction to the book, and it gives some oversight and summary of the richness of that book. But what I want to do is, I thought I would start and make this a little bit more personal just by reflecting on some of my own experience and then putting that in the context of talking about teaching about religion and the kind of how that becomes significant. I'm conscious of being in what might be thought of as a cathedral school. I'm not sure it's exactly like the old medieval schools, but it's very interesting to be in a school that's linked with the church. Obviously, through much of history, that was the arrangement. And now I, on the other hand, grew up in the American schools, which were and have been very secular, although I live in a state which it's really the only state in the United States that has a majority religion. Well, Rhode Island has a majority Catholics by just barely 1%, so 51 or 52%. But although I lived in a state that has a dominant religion, it was very clear that we didn't have religious instruction in the schools. In fact, I remember when I was in kindergarten or first grade, I can't remember which one, when they changed our Pledge of Allegiance. And I mention this because this has been a big issue recently. There's been a lot of litigation because one of the things in our Pledge of Allegiance is it now says, Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, etc., under God, one nation. I'm fouling up the actual wording here, but the phrase under God was added. And I remember as a 5 or 6 year old when that phrase was added. I didn't think a lot about it. I just thought, this is interesting, and I had to remember 2 more words and so on. But that's a reminder of how through much of the history these schools have been secular, although we do have that kind of phrase. Another kind of experience, one of the most controversial decisions in the United States of the past 50 years was the decision that held it was impermissible to have school prayer. Now, while there was no religious instruction, many parts of the United States, they would start the day with a short prayer, typically non-denominational. But in 1962, the Supreme Court struck down the Regents Prayer that had been written by the regents of the New York school system. And at the time, this was very controversial. I have to say, one of the interesting things in my own life experience was that even though I lived in a state with a dominant religion, we had not had school prayers in my school system. That is, until the Supreme Court did this. And then I think people sort of started doing some prayers as conscientious objection or something like that. But I think one of the things that I remember is the importance and the influence of school teachers and other societal factors in teaching tolerance, the teaching that just as my own religious tradition had suffered a great deal of persecution historically in the United States, that it was very important to be tolerant to others. And this is something that one learned, I think, in a very practical way as a young child in school. I remember actually after law school, I clerked for a court in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the Deep South, and this was for the court that was really responsible for desegregating the South, the part of our country where the racist history had been most intense. And a tremendous amount of work was done to bring about integration of the races. I remember in law school doing a paper, among other things, about the German school prayer decision, which, as many of you would know, was quite different than the U.S. Position on which had disallowed prayer. Germany had almost the opposite position because the German Constitution provides that religion shall be an ordinary subject in the classroom. I think one of the things about this is it emphasizes how different religious traditions should be. One of the reasons that in the United States we did not have religion in the classroom is that one of the things that made public school possible in the United States in the 19th century, we had so many different religions in the country that if we had tried to have one religion of one kind or another in the schools, there would never have been enough democratic support to get the schools themselves in place. And so the compromise of secular schools was something that made possible the very existence of the schools. And so to the extent there were signs of religion in the schools, this was a sign that that compromise was being broken and that the religious freedom that respected everyone was being broken. Now, in the German experience, it was almost the opposite, because in the 19th century, when Bismarck was the sort of the leading figure in Germany, he led what was called the Kulturkampf, the cultural struggle, the cultural Kampf. And one of the signs of that was pushing religion out of the schools, criticism of Catholicism and so forth, so that the experience from a religious liberty perspective was that taking religion out of the schools was an attack on religion. Same thing happened again in 1933 with the Kirchenkampf, the church struggle under Hitler, and again the pressure was to move religion out of the schools. And so when the Basic Law in Germany was written in 1948-49, the phrase about religion being an ordinary subject in the schools was a protection of religious freedom. Interestingly, absolutely opposite institutional structure, but with, in some ways, the same basic idea, protecting freedom. So I think one of the things that this brings out is the significance of understanding the difference of social and historical context. I think I'll skip over a couple of these other examples, but I think one of the things that is very significant when we think about religion and the state globally, the first thing is, as a comparative constitutional lawyer, I would say that nowhere more clearly than in education does one sense the reality of what the church-state system of a country is. Nowhere does every country wrestles with this problem. And one of the reasons every country wrestles with this problem is that the issue of religion in the schools and in education is part of the transmission of culture to the next generation. So there is always a threefold relationship with the children themselves that are in the school, the parents, the school, and the state. So it's really the parents, the school, and the state that their various interests in the education of their children has to be worked out. And as times change, as history changes, different kinds of allocations get set up. Now, one of the clear international rights in this regard, I didn't put it the wording, but the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 18, that deals with religious freedom, the subparagraph 4 talks about the rights of parents to raise their children in accordance with their beliefs. But of course, this can be interpreted differently in different types of systems. And we've seen some examples as we've gone through the conference. There are, of course, some states that have confessional schools that teach catechism, in effect, within the schools. There are secular interdenominational schools. Most countries, except the most strictly typically hostile to religion type regimes, allow private schools, so that at least if religious groups are not satisfied with the public education system, they have a right to set up private schools. And I take it this setting we're in right now is the example of that type of school. The private schools, depending on the country, in the United States, the private schools really get virtually no funding from the government, although there have been some changes over the last decade or so, so there's a little bit more flexibility for some peripheral types of costs that these schools face. But of course, in many countries, even in secular France, there will be substantial funding for the secular part of the curriculum in private schools. And then we have the issues of what happens in the public schools. Do you have a system like the United States where religious instruction is basically not allowed? Do you have a system like Germany where religious instruction is required? And I take it it's like Portugal in the sense that where there is religious instruction, the qualifications of the teachers may be governed by the state, but the actual selection of the teachers is in accordance with the religion of that is being taught. And then the other kind of approach that one can see, and we're seeing this increasingly in many parts of the world, is not teaching of religion, but teaching about religion. This will take the form of a world religions course or some other kind of course in which the effort is not to inculcate religion, but to give students a kind of introduction to the religions of others, so they'll be in a position to be more tolerant, more understanding, less prone to stereotypical judgments about other religious traditions, and so forth. Of course, there are a lot of contexts in which teaching about religion can happen, or for that matter, teaching of religion could happen in religious instruction itself. In the United States, one of the interesting things we have is that while on the one hand you can't have teaching of religion in the actual classroom, many states, including my own, have systems where students will be released for an hour or so during the day to go to a nearby facility where religious instruction in the denomination of their choice is possible. Often countries will have, typically as alternatives to religion, they may have ethics or civics courses, and of course religion is part of history, so teaching about religion, it's hard to teach history without teaching something about religion, the same for literature. These days, one of the often sensitive issues is health or sex education, which religious parents may not like the way secular institutions do this, so you can get some very sensitive issues in that kind of domain. Now, a few years ago, I had the privilege of being one of the chairs of a project done by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe on teaching about religion. And I thought I would say just a few, well, maybe more than a few words about that, because I think that we learned a lot about how one might think about and the things one has to think about to structure a human rights sensitive course or of teaching about religion. This was called the Toledo Guiding Principles on Teaching About Religions. I've got a website there that will come up again in a moment. But what I want to do is give just an overview of the rationale of that project, its aim and scope. What was significant is that we realized we could do a kind of human rights framework for thinking about this. There's been a lot of work on teaching about religion from a scholarly and pedagogical standpoint. What we as the Advisory Council for the OSCE thought we could add is a human rights perspective. I want to say a few words about principles that guide creation of that kind of curriculum, and also about preparing the teachers for that kind of curriculum, and then practical applications. So again, this is just a picture of the cover of that work, and it is available online. If you remember Toledo Guiding Principles and the OSCE site, you can get to this little pamphlet's about 50 or 60 pages long. I think in view of the time, let me skip over some of this. There's a real positive value in teaching that emphasizes the respect for everyone's right to freedom of religion or belief, and that was part of our focus. There's been a lot of concern with this kind of teaching that it might somehow relativize or undermine people's belief in their own traditions. And one of the things that we emphasized in our approach was the point is not that you need to believe in or somehow accept other people's beliefs. You might disagree strongly with other people's beliefs. The point is that we need to understand in a society that has people coming from many different beliefs, we need to learn to respect the rights of other people. And that was one of the things we emphasized. Obviously, teaching about religions and beliefs can help minimize harmful misunderstandings and stereotypes. I also need to stress that as we wrote these, we were very anxious to stress these are voluntary guidelines. We were not trying to make an argument that states should change their religious system if they didn't want to. We were particularly concerned knowing that in many parts of the OSCE there are established types of systems. All the European countries, most European countries, as we learned from Drago Cepar's presentation this morning, have, especially in Europe, have some kind of religious instruction, and the aim was not to dismantle those, but in our time there is increasing thought that the value of helping people, whether you're teaching a denominational course or a more interdenominational kind of course, it's just helpful for people in our societies to know about other religions. So these were voluntary guidelines, and our purpose was to help guide states if they want to do this kind of things. We didn't assess church-state systems, whether they were cooperationist or separationist. I talked about some of these points. I think part of this stress is on the importance of neutrality and objectivity. Obviously, no system can be perfectly neutral or perfectly objective, but one can try to be even-handed and fair in the way things are treated, and one can think carefully about protecting the rights of parents and children, and also about the rights and responsibilities of teachers, and in the process trying to be fair both to majorities and minorities. few words about preparation of this kind of curriculum itself. Obviously, it's important that this be done in a very professional kind of way. It's important, in whatever community these are being drafted for, to think of the actual community and to be inclusive of people in that community, to be sensitive to the local situation, and also to think about things from multiple perspectives. There are different ways that this kind of teaching about religion can be done. It can be done in something like a world religions course, so a subject-specific course. It can be integrated with other parts of the curriculum. There can be cross-curricular offerings, and one has to think, there's a tendency for things to be sort of teacher-oriented, but of course things ought to be more student-oriented in their approach. Now, one of the most striking things to me as we worked on this process is just thinking about what is necessary to prepare the teachers to teach this kind of thing. And as I think back, if you think about, and I don't know what your experience here at this school is, but I've watched a lot of legal systems, I have a lot of educational systems, and there's a tendency to have teachers who teach mathematics, to teach science, who teach the language of the country where you are, who teach foreign languages. And all too often, if there's something like teaching about religion, that gets taught by whoever's left over, or who's ever sort of a little lower on the priority scale. But if you think about it, this is one of the hardest topics to teach. Most of us, if we have a religion, could spend our lives studying our own religion and would not exhaust that. And if you try to do that, plus learn about some other religions, so you know enough to talk responsibly about them, this is a tremendously difficult thing. But it's not just that. Because what's as important as having the substantive knowledge is there's a whole different level of skill of how, if you're a teacher and you know you've got people from different religious backgrounds, pupils, how do you teach things which will be reinforcing for some but might seem critical to others? How do you do this, and how do you give the students an experience so that they feel, so that they learn, as part of this experience, that they learn to tolerate each other and to respect each other and to respect each other's rights? That pedagogical skill is very challenging and very difficult. And I think one of the things I learned is that if one is going to take this kind of process seriously, which actually most of our systems, whatever kind of system we have, needs to do, this is part of what we need to cultivate for the societies that we live in. It's just vital that people somehow come through their early years and have experiences which will not antagonize them toward other religions, but help them to learn how to respect the rights of others in sensitive ways. This is tremendously difficult, and that teaching teachers how to teach about religion is something that's often neglected, but maybe one of the most important components. Well, I think I'm probably running low on time, so I'm going to, let me just say a couple of other quick things. One of the things we realized, in most legal systems that deal with teaching about religion have opt-out rights. This is also something one has to think about. I remember reading the case, there's a European court case about Norway, and they had a kind of a teaching about religion course, and the humanists objected to it because they still thought it was too religious. And one of the things that was happening is their children were given opt-out rights, at least some of the times, but here's what happened. They would get sent to a room so they didn't have to participate in the class, right? Guess who else was sent to that room? The students who were being punished. So what do you think the students who were opting out felt like? They felt like they were being punished. So one of the points is sometimes we think about we think we've solved the problem if we let people opt out of something, but opting out may brand the students. It may make it hard for them to, the other students may pick on them afterwards. There are all kinds of social dynamics that have to be thought about, and so one has to think not only of letting people opt out, but how does that work so that it's really sensitive? I mean, the reality is, in some situations in the United States, we've worried enough about what may happen to the children that's part of the reason we don't have religious instruction in the schools, because there's such a worry that it will result in stigmatization and really some persecution for some of the little children. Well, we've got a lot of conclusions. I think I'm going to skip through a bunch of these things. I wanted to just, let me conclude with just one final story from my own life. This one is about my son's graduation from high school. This is now about 20 years back, but I'll always remember this particular day because in the United States, we had these decisions that said you couldn't have school prayer in the normal curriculum. But then one of the things that became controversial in the early 90s was whether you could have prayer at the graduation. And this was a kind of borderline issue, because part of the notion was you shouldn't have prayer with little children because they're impressionable. But of course, graduation from high school, at least in the United States, was a kind of rite of passage to adulthood, and there was always thought that adults could handle these kind of things a little bit better. So there was a question about whether this was permissible. There was a Supreme Court decision that said if the state schools themselves orchestrated the prayer, that was impermissible. And so it looked like there was not going to be any kind of prayer at my son's graduation. But then there were some decisions that said, well, maybe it's okay if the students organize the prayer themselves. And indeed, right at this time, I was working on a brief on one of these cases, and I sent the brief off, and then the same day went to my son's graduation, and originally they were not going to allow a prayer at the graduation because of some of these other uncertainties. The students decided that they would organize a prayer at this thing, and I have to admit, I went to this event, and as this was starting to happen, I was sort of listening to what they were going to do with the heart of a lawyer, and I have to say that's not a good way to engage in prayer. But I was thinking, how are they doing it? What are they going to do, and so forth. And a very interesting experience. I live in a community. When I moved into it, it was maybe 1%. We had virtually no minorities. It was an all-white community. It's changing now. But on this day, the person got up to say the prayer at this graduation. He started the prayer in English, but he was a Chicano, and he switched into Spanish. And this, I have to tell you, was very moving for me, because it was a reminder to me that in a public setting, we may not understand other people's religions, just as I didn't understand the language of that prayer. But I knew what he was doing, and I respected what he was doing, and that was really a very moving, very unforgettable experience for me. I think that in some ways, we need to cultivate systems around the world where we can understand each other's religions. It will be somewhat like that. We will not necessarily understand all the things that other people believe, but we have some sense for their sense for transcendence, and it resonates with our own. And I think if we all feel respected and safe in our own beliefs, that stabilizes society and makes society better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for excellent and highly interesting presentation.